In the heart of a mountain wrapped in black clouds, the Dragon Lord stood alone, watching from a cold balcony high above the world. Below, his eyes were narrow and sharp, glowing like fire as he looked down upon the valley, where humans now walked freely. Once these lands belonged only to dragons, proud and wild and full of power. But things had changed, and he did not like it. He was old, older than any tree, older than many stars. His wings were wide, his tail long, his scales dark and heavy like stone carved from ancient cliffs. And though his breath could still burn and his roar still shake the skies, his heart had grown bitter through the ages, full of anger and silence. Humans had come to serve in his great hall, not as equals, but as workers, cleaners, builders, cooks, and guards. And though he never trusted them, he allowed them inside, for he thought them weak and small. But one human was different. Her name was Alara. She moved through the castle like wind through leaves, soft and unseen, but always there, always watching and working without pause. She never spoke unless spoken to, never ran unless chased, never laughed unless alone, the other servants said. She was strange, but the Dragon Lord saw something else, something in her eyes that made him curious, and that curiosity soon turned to suspicion. He thought perhaps she was hiding something, perhaps her silence was not fear, but pride, perhaps her loyalty was only a mask, and so he made a plan, a quiet test, one that would show her true heart without a single word spoken. In the deep part of the mountain, under 10 layers of magic and metal, there was a vault no human had ever seen, a place of gold and gems, of glowing crystal from alien worlds, of scrolls that sang when touched and armor that moved on its own. And one morning the Dragon Lord gave a silent order to his guards: open the vault, leave it unguarded, and let only one person near it, Alara. The doors opened with a great sound, but no one heard, for the magic kept it quiet. The light inside glowed with a soft red hue, and the air was warm and heavy. The treasure lay in perfect order, as if untouched by time, and for one moment the vault seemed like a dream, a place not made for mortals. Alara was given simple orders today: clean the lower hall, polish the brass torch holders, and dust the corner shelves. But as she passed the great stairwell, she saw the vault door wide open, the stone path lit by soft lights leading down into the treasure room below. She blinked, looked around. No one was there. The Dragon Lord watched her from above through a crystal mirror carved into the wall. His wings folded, his breath slow, waiting for her to step in, waiting for her to make a choice. Alara paused at the top of the stairs, her hand still and her broom resting on the floor. She tilted her head, listening. The air was too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Even the walls felt alive, watching her, just as she was watching them. She took a step forward, slow and careful, one foot, then the other, the sound of her boots against the stone floor soft like a whisper. And as she reached the bottom, she saw the treasure with her own eyes for the first time: a sea of gold coins stacked high, glowing stones pulsing like stars, strange weapons floating above small metal plates, and a long silver crown resting on a crystal stand. The chamber smelled of age and dust and magic, the kind of magic that sings to the heart and tempts the soul. Alara stood there silent, her eyes moving from corner to corner. She did not smile or gasp or move closer. Instead, she walked slowly around the room, careful not to step on anything, not to knock anything over. Her hand stayed at her sides, calm and steady. The Dragon Lord narrowed his eyes. She was inside the vault alone with everything, and yet she did not touch even a single coin. She walked like a shadow, soft and without weight, her eyes full of thought, but not greed, and this confused him. Alara reached the crown and looked at it a moment, the silver catching the light, the gems glowing blue and green like fire under ice. She knelt beside it and pulled a cloth from her pocket, then gently draped it over the crown as if it were sleeping, then turned and walked to the center of the room, where a floating orb spun slowly above a silver bowl. The orb glowed with purple light, tiny sparks moving across its surface like stars trapped in glass. She looked at it long and slow, her head tilted, eyes steady. She reached out, not to grab, but to shield the orb with her other hand. She took a box from the nearby shelf, opened it, and placed the orb inside, then closed it without a word. The Dragon Lord leaned closer, his claws tapping the mirror. This was not how humans acted. They were greedy, loud, hungry for power. But this one was calm. She handled power like it was a feather, and he did not understand. Alara turned, once more looked over the treasure one last time, and then quietly walked back up the stairs, her broom, now resting on her shoulder, her steps soft and slow. As before, she did not run, she did not steal, she simply left. The air behind her shifted as if the vault itself sighed, and as she stepped into the hallway above the door, slowly closed behind her, the light fading with a soft sound and the magic locking in place once again. The Dragon Lord stood in silence, staring into the now dark mirror, his heart uncertain, his mind turning like storm clouds rolling across the sky. He had laid a perfect trap. He had offered her power beyond reason, and she had walked away from it like it was nothing. He looked down at his claw, then at the mirror again, and for the first time in many years, he felt something he could not name, something like a question rising in his chest. Who was Alara really, and why did her silence speak louder than all the gold in the world? And deep within his ancient heart, the first crack began to form, not of anger, not of hate, but of wonder. Alara walked away from the treasure vault with quiet steps, her boots brushing softly against the polished stone floor, her hands still holding the broom she had carried since morning, her face calm, but her thoughts moving like slow waves across a quiet lake. She had seen riches beyond dreams, but she felt no hunger for them, no desire to own or take, or even wish she had looked, and she had left just as she had arrived, in silence. In the halls above, the Dragon Lord stood motionless, his eyes locked on the fading image inside his crystal mirror. The vault had remained untouched, and the test had passed without sound, but the result echoed in his ancient chest louder than the roar of any beast, for he had expected greed, hunger, maybe even fear, but he had not expected respect or restraint or grace, and now the old dragon did not know what to make of this small, quiet human. He watched her return to her duties, sweeping dust from narrow cracks in the stone, cleaning golden vases along the wall, wiping soot from the carved symbols that lit the hall with soft green glow. She worked without rush, without pause or movement, steady and smooth, as if time did not matter, as if her purpose was simply to serve and serve well. The other servants did not notice her pass. Most never spoke to her. She had no friends in the castle, and no enemies. Either she was not cruel, not cold, just alone by choice, and that made her strange in their eyes, strange, but harmless. So they let her be and carried on with their chores while she moved like wind around them. From the shadowed tower, the Dragon Lord turned to his advisor, a tall, dark creature wrapped in long folds of shadow, with silver eyes and a voice like thunder rolling across mountains. His name was Kor, and he had served the Dragon Lord for more than 200 years. She did not touch a single thing, Kor said slowly, his gaze fixed on the now dark vault. Not even the gem, the one from the stars, the one that whispers. She boxed it without fear and walked away as if it were trash. The Dragon Lord said nothing, his wings folding tighter across his back, his tail twitching once across the stone floor, his claws tapping lightly against the marble as thoughts swirled in his mind, thoughts that felt like smoke without fire, like questions without answers. Kor stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Do you still believe she is dangerous, my lord, or do you think she is simply foolish? Foolish, the Dragon Lord finally said, his voice deep and low perhaps, but not weak and not blind. There is a line between greed and strength, and I believe she walks that line better than most of her kind. Kor tilted his head, shadows shifting around him. Should we test her again? A different test, a harder one. The Dragon Lord nodded, but said nothing more. Instead, he turned back toward the window, his eyes falling on the mountain peaks in the distance, where stars hung low and clouds moved slow and silent, like old secrets crawling across the sky. That night, Alara finished her work and returned to the servant quarters, a simple stone room with one bed, one table, and one lamp. She washed her hands in cold water, folded her clothes, placed her broom beside the door, and sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers resting on her knees, her eyes fixed on the wall, where a small crack ran from floor to ceiling like a scar through stone. She remembered the vault, of course. She remembered the crown and the glowing orb and the strange feeling in the air like being watched from a great height, but she did not fear it. She had learned long ago that fear only feeds the fire, and she had no fire left to give. Alara leaned back, slowly pulling a thin blanket over her legs, closing her eyes, listening to the faint hum of the castle, the wind and the high towers, the quiet drip of water somewhere deep below, and the slow, deep breath of the mountain itself. She did not dream, or if she did, she would never tell. By morning, a new task had been given, not by word, not by scroll, just by change a hallway once off limits. Now open a path once guarded, now clear, and in the middle of that path lay something new, something bright and tempting. A single gem as red as fire, as smooth as glass, and as deep as space rested in the center of the stone floor. No guards, no signs, no sounds, just the gem pulsing slowly like a quiet heart waiting. Alara came upon it during her normal walk, her broom held loose in one hand, her eyes scanning the ground ahead. As always, she saw the gem and stopped just for a second, her eyes narrowing, her breath steady, her fingers twitching not in fear but in thought. She stepped closer, bent her knees, and crouched beside the gem, watching it, watching her. She tilted her head, then looked around. No one near, no voice calling, no shadow moving, just her and the gem and the empty hall. She did not touch it. Instead, she reached for a small claw from her pocket, wrapped it gently around the gem, and placed it inside a nearby drawer in a side table used for lost items left by nobles, then marked the table with a small chalk X and walked away without a word. Above in the shadows, the Dragon Lord watched once again, his eyes sharp, his chest still again. She did not take again. She did not touch, not out of fear, but out of care, and that care began to burn like a small light in his chest, something old, something long forgotten. Kor stepped beside him again, his voice soft. She is not normal. My lord, her kind, does not act this way. This is not training. This is not trick. She chooses to act with honor. Honor, the Dragon Lord whispered, as if tasting the word for the first time in 100 years. He closed his eyes, and for a moment remembered a time, before war, before fire, when dragons and humans had once shared more than land. And as Alara returned to her, cleaning her hands, brushing dust from old weapons, her face calm, and eyes clear, the castle seemed to shift slightly, as if the stones themselves now watched her with interest, and perhaps even with respect. The sky above the mountain turned deep gray as clouds rolled across the peaks like slow waves made of smoke. The wind howled through narrow towers, the sound bouncing through the old stone halls like voices from a far time. And within the Dragon Lord's chamber, silence grew heavy, as if the air itself waited for a decision to rise. The Dragon Lord stood near the fire, his wings folded tight, his eyes glowing in the shadow, his breath low and slow like wind moving through a forest after a long rain. Beside him, the dark figure of Kor stood watching the flames dance on the stone walls. The gem test had failed again. The human girl Alara had touched nothing, had stolen nothing, had feared nothing, and had acted with the kind of respect they had not seen in centuries. The Dragon Lord turned to Kor, his voice quiet and firm. I want another test, this one deeper, harder, stranger. I want to know if she is truly different or only clever with her tricks. Kor bowed low, his shadows shifting around him like black water. What shall it be, my lord? Something to tempt her heart or something to test her will? Both, said the Dragon Lord. Then he turned toward the hall, his claws scraping the floor with a sound like old thunder. I want you to place the memory gem in her path, the one from the old world, the one that shows truth. I want to see what her truth looks like. Kor nodded and vanished like smoke carried on wind. And within the hour, the plan was moving. The memory gem was placed inside the south wing, where light did not reach. An air stood still. A small pedestal was raised at the center of the room. The gem floated above it, spinning slowly, glowing faint blue and white like moonlight trapped in water. The room was left unguarded. No signs, no locks, no words spoken. It was made to look like a mistake, like someone had simply forgotten to store the gem away. And by mid-morning, Alara was sent there with simple instructions: clean the floors and dust the walls, nothing more. She arrived with broom and cloth, as always, her steps soft, her breath steady, her face calm as still water. She did not rush, she did not complain. She simply entered and began her work, sweeping along the edges of the room, wiping dust from stone carvings and ancient lamps until her eyes caught the faint glow ahead. She stopped, her broom resting against the wall, her head tilted slightly. As she stepped forward slowly, the glow growing stronger with each step, her heartbeat steady, her eyes never blinking. And when she reached the pedestal, she looked up and saw the gem spinning alone in the center of the room, as if waiting for her. Alara did not touch it. She simply stood and watched as images began to flicker inside the gem like dreams made of light. She saw a village burning, humans running, dragons flying above with fire and teeth and roaring. She saw children hiding, she saw warriors fall, she saw blood and broken walls, and in the middle of it all, she saw herself younger, smaller eyes wide with fear, holding her mother's hand, as smoke wrapped around them like a dark cloak. Then the image shifted and she saw a field under stars, a human boy and a young dragon sitting side by side, sharing bread, laughing. She saw books being passed between hands, human hands, dragon claws, learning from each other, teaching each other, living together like something old and true, something good and forgotten. Her eyes stayed fixed as the gem spun faster, showing more war and peace, hope and pain, love, and lost the full truth of both sides, human and dragon, and all the cracks in between where light still tried to shine through. She stepped back, her breath deeper, now her face still calm, but her eyes filled with quiet fire, not anger, not sorrow, but something deeper, something that could not be taken or broken or taught, something that only grew when pain was met with kindness and truth with choice. She turned and walked back across the room, her broom once again in hand, her back straight, her hands steady. She did not speak, she did not cry. She simply walked away, leaving the memory gems spinning alone in the silence. From a mirror above, the Dragon Lord watched, and for the first time in many lifetimes, he did not speak. His eyes followed her steps as she left the chamber, his claws clenched, and then relaxed, his wings lifting slightly, as if caught in a wind only he could feel. Kor appeared again, silent as shadow. She saw the truth and walked away as if she already knew it. Perhaps she did, the Dragon Lord replied, his voice low. Perhaps her silence is not emptiness, but strength. Perhaps she does not run because she knows she carries nothing to fear. And what now, Kor asked, shall we press harder or step back? The Dragon Lord turned from a mirror, his steps slow as he walked to the center of the room, his tail curling behind him. She carries pain, but does not wear it like a shield. She sees the past, but does not let it guide her. Hate, that is power, not of flame, but of heart. Then he paused, looking toward the high ceiling where carvings of old dragons stared down from stone. Eyes, once I believed no human could hold such depth. Now I wonder if perhaps they have only hidden it better than we have. The castle shifted that night with a kind of breath. The wind in the halls grew softer, the torches burned more still, and the old stone walls seemed to listen more closely than before, as if even they had begun to respect the quiet steps of a human, Maid who never asked for power, never chased glory, and yet passed every test with silent fire. And somewhere deep in the vault far below, where treasures slept under spells and silence, a single gem began to glow, not from magic, but from memory, awakened not by command but by choice. The morning air was cold and quiet as light crept slowly across the peaks of the Dragon Mountain, clouds hanging low like heavy blankets pulled across the sky. The castle halls echoed with soft steps and gentle wind, but deeper inside the great chamber of flame, the Dragon Lord waited with eyes like burning stone and wings that rose and fell with each breath, slow and deep and full of thought. Alara had passed 3 tests, not with pride or strength or clever tricks, but with stillness, with calm, with quiet grace that neither begged nor defied. And now the old dragon, who had seen more war than peace, found himself standing in silence, wondering not about her next move, but about her past. He gave the order with a single clawed gesture, and Kor vanished in a shadow again. His task simple, to find the truth behind Alara's face, behind her silence, behind her calm. Something in her eyes still carried weight, something old and strong, and the Dragon Lord wanted to see what it was. Hours passed, the fire crackled, but brought no warmth, only flickering light across the stone walls where carvings of dragons in flight stretched across the ceiling, frozen in their proud beauty. Kor returned as the sun dipped below the horizon, his form twisting from darkness, his eyes bright with knowledge. She is not just a maid, he said, his voice low. She was born in the Eastlands, far beyond the Black Wind Ridge. Her family was of noble blood before the last war. Her father, a general, her mother, a scholar. Her home was destroyed when dragons burned the southern fields, and her village fell to ash. The Dragon Lord listened without speaking, the words sinking into his heart like rain into cracked earth. He remembered that battle. He remembered the fire, the screams, the orders given without question, without pause. He had believed it necessary, a show of strength, a warning. And now he learned that from those flames came this girl who chose to serve instead of hate. She was taken in by wandering monks. Kor continued, raised in silence, trained in discipline, taught the old ways, the human ways before war and pride poisoned the land. She chose to serve in your house not by command, but by path she believed it would bring peace between the broken ends of both worlds. The dragon lord closed his eyes, the fire reflecting across his scales. She saw her people fall, yet did not raise a sword. She saw her home burn, yet did not raise her voice. She saw the monster who ruled this castle and walked its halls without fear. He stood and moved toward the great window, looking out across the valley where shadows stretched long across the trees and rivers, and the sky above turned red with twilight. Her choice was not weakness, it was strength greater than the fire in my chest. "Call her to me," he said, his voice steady. Kor bowed and vanished once more, and within minutes Alara was brought to the throne room, her steps soft, her eyes curious, but never wide with fear. She knelt before the throne, as all humans were taught to do, yet her head remained high and her gaze clear. The dragon lord leaned forward, his voice low. "You have passed through fire and never screamed. You have walked among treasure and never stolen. You have touched memory and never looked away." Alara said nothing, her hands folded, her breath quiet. She waited. "Tell me why," he asked, not as a test, not as a trap, but as a question from one soul to another. "Tell me why you came here." Alara looked up, her voice soft like the wind before rain. "I came to understand." "Understand what?" "The silence between us," she said, "the wall between dragons and humans built from fear and fire and silence. I came to live inside that silence, to listen to it, to carry it until it spoke." "And has it spoken?" "Yes," she said. "And what did it say?" "It said that silence is not the enemy, only the space between wounds and healing." The dragon lord sat back, his claws curling into the stone beside his throne. Her words like smoke moved through the chamber, slow and strong, not loud, but lasting. "You lost your family to dragon fire," he said, "and yet you serve in a dragon's hall." Alara nodded. "Because hate burns fast and bright, but leaves nothing behind. I did not want to burn, I wanted to build." "What do you want now?" the dragon lord asked. "Power, freedom, revenge." "Peace," Alara said. "Not for me, for everyone." The words were simple, but they struck the chamber like thunder, and even the fire seemed to pause in its dance across the hearth. The dragon lord rose slowly, his wings unfolding, his eyes locked on the girl below him, and he saw in her not a servant, not a stranger, not even a human. He saw a mirror reflecting something he had forgotten long ago. Before war, before pride, before loss, he saw hope. "You will no longer clean these halls," he said. "You will no longer serve as a shadow. You will walk beside me as voice and wisdom and light." Alara looked up, and her eyes held no pride, no shock, only calm and purpose. "I will serve as long as the silence needs a voice." "Then rise," the dragon lord said, and the mountain itself seemed to shift as if hearing the change. And as Alara stood, the fire burned higher, not with hunger, but with warmth, and in the vault far below, the silver crown pulsed with light beneath its cloth, as if waking from a long sleep. The wind outside howled as night blanketed the mountain, the stars above hidden behind thick clouds that rolled like giants through the sky. The dragon lord stood atop his tower, silent as stone, watching the world below, not with anger, not with pride, but with thought, his heart heavy and strange, his chest warm with something he had not felt in 1,000 years. Alara had spoken with no fear, with no lies, with no mask, and her words had cut through the shadows of his mind like fire through frost. Now she walked through his halls not as servant, not as ghost, but as a presence clear and steady. The other dragons watched her, the servants whispered, but no one stopped her, and that alone made the dragon lord pause. In the shadows beside him, Kor appeared again, the old shape of darkness, now dim with wonder. His silver eyes flickered with questions more than answers. "She has not taken anything, my lord, not a coin, not a favor, not a name. She carries no badge, no crown, no blade, yet the mountain moves for her." The dragon lord turned his eyes, still on the cold horizon. "Then let us see if she moves for herself, or only for others. Let us offer her one more choice, not gold, not gems, but doubt." Kor nodded and vanished, and the plan began again. This time, no magic, no glowing tests, only a trick as old as time. The next morning, Alara walked her usual path through the east wing, where tall windows poured gray light onto the floor, where old statues stood with faces lost to age, and there on the floor, scattered like leaves after wind, lay gold coins shining soft and cold. No one stood near, no voice called her name, no steps echoed in the halls. The castle was silent, as if waiting. Alara stopped and looked at the coins, her brow calm, her hands. Still, she glanced around, then knelt slowly and began to gather the coins, not in her own pocket, not in her own hand, but into a nearby wooden bowl resting near a broken shelf, each piece handled with care, her touch soft, her face unreadable. As she worked, another shadow stepped into view, core tall and quiet. And still he said nothing, just watched and waited, and when she looked up and saw him, she nodded, once placed the last coin into the bowl, and stood without excuse, without fear. I thought perhaps someone dropped these, she said softly. They should not be left in the open. Kor tilted his head, and his voice was like the crackle of dry leaves. And if I told you they were for you, what then? Alara looked down at the bowl, then back at him. Then I would return them. Still, they are not mine. Kor stepped aside, and Alara passed him without another word, her steps calm, her hands empty, her eyes steady. And in the far corner of the hall, where no fire reached, the dragon lord watched through a thin mirror carved into the stone and said nothing for a long time. Later that night, the dragon lord walked alone into the vault deep beneath the castle, where walls pulsed with old magic and silence reigned over treasure from 10,000 years. He looked at the crown, now glowing under its cloth, and the orb, now still in its box, and he whispered to the dark, I left the door open to trap her, but I think it was not her that stepped into it. He stood there for a long time, no flames, no servants, just him and the gold and the weight in his chest growing heavier with each breath. Above in the halls, Alara sat alone in the study, now given to her, as chamber of thought, its walls lined with old books and scrolls, its window wide and full of stars, the wind soft against the glass, and the candlelight warm on her hands. She read in silence, her eyes following old letters from both dragon tongue and human script side by side in peace, as if the paper itself remembered a time when they were not enemies. A quiet knock came, and Kor entered without shadow, his figure more man than mist, his voice softer than before. He sat across from her, and for a long time they said nothing. He finally spoke. You were never meant to be more than a broom and a key, and yet now the mountain listens when you walk. Alara looked at him with calm eyes. I never asked it to listen. That is why it does, he said. She closed the book gently, placed it on the table, and looked out the window. The stars had returned, the sky now clear, the wind no longer howling, only whispering, and somewhere deep inside the castle the old stone heart began to beat again, not with fire, but with something gentler, something stronger. And the dragon lord alone in his vault looked at his reflection in a silver plate, old and worn, and saw not the beast of war, not the king of treasure, but something softer. And he whispered once more, not to the gold, not to the walls, but to himself, perhaps the trap I set was never hers but mine. The sun rose slow across the sky, painting the mountaintop in soft gold, as if the world itself breathed easier in that light. The castle stood strong and quiet, but something within its stone began to shift, not with noise, not with fire, but with silence that held meaning and warmth. The dragon lord moved through the halls without his guards, his wings folded tight, his steps careful, as if the ancient floor carried weight heavier than treasure, heavier than war, heavier than pride. He made his way to the high chamber where once only kings spoke and no human voice had echoed, and there at the center stood a chair of black stone carved by flame and shaped by claw. Beside it now stood a second chair, smaller, simpler, made of oak and iron, placed there by no command, but by unseen hands, perhaps the mountain itself, perhaps fate. Alara entered it silent, request her robe, plain her hands, clean her eyes, quiet like always, but now the silence that followed her felt different, not empty, not shy, but full like the deep of a calm sea. And she stepped forward with no fear, with no doubt, and stood before the dragon lord, not kneeling, not bowing, only standing with breath like wind and heart like stone. The dragon lord looked at her long, his voice low and slow like thunder rolling over far hills. I have tested you with gold, with memory, with lies. I have watched you walk through fire without burning and through shadow without stumbling, and now I find I have no more tests to give, only questions. Alara tilted her head and weighted her hands at her sides, her eyes still. Why did you not take the coins? Why did you not hold the crown? Why did you not speak your story until I dragged it from the earth? He asked, not with anger, not with judgment, only wonder. Alara breathed in and answered, because I came to serve, not to conquer. I came to understand, not to argue. I came to see if peace could be found, not forced. The Dragon Lord moved to the window, where clouds drifted beneath the tower like rivers of silver. He placed one claw against the stone, his tail curling slowly. Behind him, you could have taken anything. I would not have stopped you. You could have used your name, your past, your pain to buy power, and yet you asked for nothing, not even a voice. Then Alara stepped closer, her voice steady. I did not want to be a symbol. I wanted to be a bridge. I did not come to fix dragons or humans. I came to stand between and see what might grow from silence. The Dragon Lord turned his eyes sharp, but no longer burning, and spoke again. Then I give you what was never given to your people. I give you choice, not command. I offer not reward, but place you may sit beside me, not as servant, not as shadow, but as counsel and conscience, as flame and breath together. Alara did not speak for a long moment, and the chamber held its breath, as if even the stone listened. Then she said, if I sit beside you, it must be as equal, not as token. If I speak, it must be from truth, not from fear. If I stay, it must be for peace, not for pride. The Dragon Lord nodded once, and the sky beyond the tower broke open with light, golden rays falling through the clouds, touching the mountainside like soft hands, and in that light the castle warmed the wind, softened the old banners on the walls, began to move again. Court entered without sound, standing at the edge of the hall, his eyes no longer hidden in shadow. He watched as the human girl stepped toward the chair of oak and iron, and placed her hand upon it, not with hunger, not with pride, but with promise. And when she sat, the castle changed, not with quake or fire, but with breath and balance. Servants below whispered, dragons in the upper halls turned their heads. The wind through the gates carried the news, not in words, but in feeling. Something new had entered the mountain, something soft that would not break, something human. The Dragon Lord returned to his seat, wings folding, eyes calm, and voice strong. Today begins not with war, not with law, but with listening. And if the world outside still burns, we will offer water, not more fire. Alara sat, without moving, her breath slow, her gaze clear, and the silence between them was no longer cold, no longer sharp. It was a silence of two worlds waiting to speak, waiting to heal. Below the hall's core walked alone through the old corridors, his fingers trailing across the stone, his thoughts no longer hidden, and he whispered to no one and everyone, the mountain has changed, and not by force, not by power, but by choice. In the vault deep below, where treasure slept in golden piles, a small silver box began to hum a soft sound like song long forgotten, and the cloth that covered the crown lifted slightly, as if touched by wind that remembered peace. And the mountain breathed. The castle stood tall beneath a sky that no longer looked like storm or sorrow, but something softer, something brighter. The sun rose over the edge of the world, spilling gold across the high towers and into the halls below, where servants moved slower, where dragons walked quieter, and where silence no longer meant fear, but reflection and change. Alara woke before the bell. As always, her room still held the quiet touch of humble life. No silk, no guards, no golden carvings, only a bed, a candle, and a table full of books that spoke in both dragon tongue and human script. She rose without rush, dressed without help, and walked the stone halls with steps that no longer echoed alone. For now, each step she took left warmth behind her, as if the walls themselves welcomed her presence. In the great hall, the Dragon Lord waited, not on his throne, but by the fire where old flames danced in low rhythm. He turned as she entered, his eyes sharp, but no longer cold, and his voice like distant thunder, softened by rain. Today, he said, your voice will guide more than my own. Your truth will rise above the gold, above the roar, above the pride that ruled for too long. Alara nodded and walked beside him to the circle chamber, where dragons of all colors and sizes had gathered, where humans once feared to step, and now entered with open hands, not to beg, not to serve, but to listen and to speak. The chamber walls were carved with stories of war, with legends of conquest, with songs of fire. But today no one looked at them. Today all eyes turned to the center, where Alara stood calm and clear-dressed, not in silk, not in armor, but in the same gray robe she wore when she first cleaned these halls, her hands empty, her heart full. She looked around, and when she spoke, her voice did not shout, but carried across the room with steady breath. I am not here to erase the past. I am not here to speak for all humans. I am here because choice brought me, and peace is born from the quiet strength of those who choose without reward. Many dragons did not move, many humans held their breath, but slowly, like ice breaking under warm light, heads began to nod and hearts began to shift, because her words did not rise like flame, they settled like snow, and in their stillness truth began to grow. The dragon lord stepped forward, not with pride, not with force, but with understanding. His wings spread wide, not to intimidate, but to show that nothing was hidden and nothing feared. He raised his voice only once, and said, "From this day, we are no longer masters and servants, no longer kings and tools. We are voices of shared world. We are breath and bone joined by trust." And as those words settled into the stone, the mountain itself trembled, not with anger, not with collapse, but with release, like a long sigh held for centuries, now free to escape. In the days that followed, new paths were carved not through stone, but through belief. Dragons and humans trained side by side, studied together, worked the fields above the mountain, and read from the same scrolls below. Alara led, without crown, without guards, without throne, and wherever she walked, others followed, not because they were told, but because they chose to. In the vault, the crown, once hidden beneath cloth, no longer slept. It rested in the open, not on her head, not in her hands, but on a small platform where all could see and remember that power untouched is more powerful than any blade. Kor, who once lived in shadow, now walked in the light, speaking with humans, learning their ways, teaching his own, and at night he would tell young dragons stories of the quiet Maid who turned kings without war, without spells, only with breath and truth. The dragon lord stood often by the high window, no longer alone, his eyes watching the horizon, not for enemies, but for signs of growth. He no longer feared change, he no longer feared silence, and sometimes he would whisper to the wind, "I left the vault open to test a human, and instead I found myself freed." Alara did not seek praise, she did not seek legend. She walked the halls, cleaned the books, taught the children, and listened to the elders. Her power was not in her voice, but in the way others quieted to hear it. Her strength, not in magic, but in the stillness that followed her, like a shadow made of peace. One evening she returned to the chamber where it all began, the vault now open, without guards, without locks. And she walked among the treasures, not to claim, but to remember each gem, each sword, each scroll, a story, not of glory, but of warning. As she placed her hand on the silver crown, just once, then stepped back and whispered, "Thank you, not for the riches, but for the choice." And the crown pulsed once, as if it understood. The mountain was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of balance, where fire and flesh, where wing and word could live without breaking, without burning. And as the stars above turned slowly across the sky, the world below shifted with them, not because of war, not because of law, but because one human maid chose to do nothing when everything lay within her reach, and in doing so changed everything.